Thank you for joining us in another video in our series focusing on the ServiceNow emergency response applications. In this video, we're going to be focusing on the emergency self-report application. This application lets us track the health and well-being, health status of the employees in our organizations. During a critical situation, an emergency like the COVID-19 outbreak or any number of other emergencies that may arise, we can utilize this application in conjunction with the other applications like emergency outreach and emergency exposure management to better understand the health and state of our employees and our workforce. Application contains a few pieces. It contains the report dashboard, which is going to look a bit different for managers as opposed to standard users, which we'll go over. There is also an overview dashboard, which is going to be an HR only dashboard. We have an all health records field, which is going to be available to every user, but every user is only going to see their own record unless they are a manager or they are an HR user. And then we have HR tasks, which HR is only going to be able to see. We did an initial video configuring these applications, and one of the ServiceNow roles that are available is a HR role for this. So only people who have this HR role are going to have that access. And also here in our emergency self-report properties, we have a quarantine HR group. This HR group is the GUID for the HR group that's defined as that group member. We also have in our properties here, we have a quarantine crisis submit message. So you can modify the submit message if you want. You can put emergency information in here, and we'll see what that looks like on our dashboard. So our dashboard also contains a section for us to have open tasks and incidents made available to us, as well as a knowledge base so that we can see any information we have made available to us specifically about the emergency at hand. So this dashboard we're viewing in the eyes of a user who is a manager, has employees directly working under them, and has HR access, which is why we're going to see access to all of the records. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and report my status back, and I'm going to report back returning to work. Maybe I am a critical employee, whether I'm working in an emergency location or whatever that may be, I'm still going to work every day. So you can see my current status is returning to work. And then if I look at the health records, I'll have a health record showing I'm returning to work. Not too much special in here. And then there's an HR task record. Oh, there's only HR task records shown for other issues, other statuses. So the next thing we're going to do is report for one of my employees. So let's report for Able Tutor, and we'll report Able as being in quarantine. So not reporting symptoms, working from home, in quarantine. I can see that he's reported that back here. I can also see that he's reported, this isn't necessarily a bad symbol, just not active and in the office. So I can choose another user. We'll choose Abe Lincoln, and we'll choose for Abraham Lincoln reporting symptoms. And we'll see Abraham Lincoln is now reporting symptoms as well. I can also look at the all health records, and I'll see health records for all three of those users who have reported symptoms, and I should see 2 HR tasks now. My HR task was returning to work, so it didn't actually create a task. I can also look at the HR dashboard, overview dashboard, and it's going to show me 2 numbers of symptomatic updates today. And then I can also, from an HR perspective, go ahead and report status. So now if I look back at my dashboard, it shows me working in an emergency location. So potential negative effects, potential exposure risk, right? I'm active and on the job. So now let's take a look at this from the view of an end user. Let's just go ahead and take a look at Um, well, let's take a look at Able Tutor, who's currently reporting in quarantine. So let's go impersonate Able. So let's choose Able Tutor here. And we're just going to type emergency and do our self-report. And we can see that I don't have any of that interesting employee information. I'm not a manager. I do have access to the knowledge articles that are made available to me. And I'm going to go change my status from in quarantine to reporting symptoms. As you can see, my current status is in quarantine, and I'm going to save. And we'll see if I look at this all health records, I'm only going to see my health record. So now let's go back in as myself as the manager. And I can see that his status changed to reporting symptoms. I can view this from both the HR side of things or from the managerial side of things. All right, so now let's take a look at this from a manager perspective that does not have the HR tasks. So I have Andrew Jackson managing George Washington. I feel like I did that a little backwards, but let's go ahead and go to our emergency self-report. Actually, if I look for emergency self-report here, I only see the dashboard and all health records. I don't see any of the HR dashboards, but here I do see my users, right? I see my managers. I can see my direct manager is reporting a status. And then I can report statuses for myself or for my users underneath me. So I'll go ahead and report my own status as reporting symptoms and save. And then I'm going to go ahead and do George Washington. No, you know what? Let's do David Miller. Decline to say, save. So here I can see the health records for Andrew Jackson and David Miller, but again, I see no HR records. If I impersonate George Washington now, since George Washington is an employee of Andrew Jackson will see this submitted record. So I submitted a record for George Washington. Only George Washington can see his own record. But if I go in as George Washington's boss, Andrew Jackson, then I can look at those records and I will see George Washington's record in here. I'll see George Washington's reporting status in my dashboard. Now, if I go back in as a user who has HR rights, if I look at the all health records, keep in mind, this user is an HR user and a manager. All health records are going to be my managerial records. HR are going to be all of the records. So if I look at all health records, I'm going to see all the health records for anybody that falls under me. Since Andrew Jackson falls under me, George Washington falls under me. And then the HR tasks are going to show the same thing. I see all of the records from the HR perspective because these are the HR records. So that is using the self-reporting dashboard in a nutshell. What we do with this information that we get back really depends on what we are planning for and doing in the state of emergency, right? It's really dependent on how our business is continuing to run. One thing we can do is pump this data into the emergency exposure management system, which is essentially looking to see if any of my users are potentially exposed based on potentially at risk based on being exposed to other at-risk users. The last thing I want to talk about is customizing these health status messages. So we can actually go to our choice lists in ServiceNow. If we just type choice lists, we'll see system definition choice lists. And we can do a search for SN_IMT_quarantine. And we'll see these request types. Anything that is SN, IMT, quarantine, crisis task with a request type, these are our custom requests. So our custom drop-down messages. So if we wanted to add a new one, we could come in here back to work ER, I find the easiest way to do it is to just go ahead and clone it. So we're just going to insert and stay and make a copy of it. And we're going to change this one to working at, let's say, home location. Actually, let's make that working at emergency location 2, because technically quarantine is working from home, and I'll show you why I believe that. So if we look at the status messages here in quarantine, its value is WFH quarantine, which is working from home quarantine. So they're technically assuming that you are still working in this scenario when you mark yourself as in quarantine. So I actually feel like we should almost change that, right? Let's do that. Let's go in there and say working from home in quarantine. And let's update that. Now, if we go back to our self-report dashboard, I have working from home in quarantine, and I have my working at emergency location 2. And I can save and submit that. And that's what it shows me as my response here. Now, I also want to show that if I change my status from anything to returning to work, then I am going to have my little status message turn back to green and happy and healthy. All right, thank you for joining us in using the emergency self-report, and join us in our next videos for learning how to use the exposure management, emergency outreach, and emergency response operations.